Governor, thank you so much for taking time. I know it's busy for you right now. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about COVID. 500,000 cases now. Just this morning surpassed 8,000 deaths, unfortunately. These numbers, do you feel like they're trending in the right direction because the cases are getting better, or is it because the testing sites were closed because of ECES?
Well, one, I think it's a rough time when you see fatalities, and so we have sympathy for all the families, and obviously not being able to see loved ones during this time. There's some hospitals still not allowing visitors in end-of-life situations. I'm encouraging them all to do that. And then, of course, we've had restrictions on visitation for nursing homes, which are the most vulnerable facilities, and we've done a good job of limiting COVID's impact there. But a lot of them have not been able to see a lot of their loved ones over many, many months. And we've had people in nursing homes who've passed away just from natural causes, but haven't had that personal interaction. So when you see that, I'm always reminded of kind of the human element that goes along with that. Now, I do think the trends in Florida are much better today than they were. And it's not really just the cases. Yeah, the cases. And I don't think the decline is because of the testing sites yet. It usually takes 7 days for those results to get posted. So if you see something maybe this weekend, maybe that'll be indicated. But I think that what you're seeing is a significant decline in visits to the emergency department with people with COVID-like symptoms, which is probably the most significant indicator, because percent positive, this, that, all that really affects how many you're testing, what's your criteria. But if fewer people are showing up in the hospital, for this, that's a good trend. The other thing we're seeing is declining hospital census for COVID positive patients. We've seen that consistently over the last 2 to 3 weeks, which is, again, a really, really good sign. So I think what we're seeing is fewer people going to the ED, fewer people being admitted to hospitals. What that will then lead to is, thankfully, fewer people dying with COVID-like illnesses. And so that's kind of where we're at. I think we're seeing it all over the state in different, some parts of the state are different parts of these viral curves, but every part of the state, is trending in a more positive direction than we were 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Have you had a chance to speak with anybody who's maybe lost a loved one from COVID? And if so, what did you have to say to them?
Yeah, no, I've had a number of people, and I think that the one thing that I think has really weighed on me is for people that lose somebody and they haven't been able to see them, at the end. Now, some of that with the hospitals is not anything we've done, but with the nursing homes in particular, I've spoken with a number of folks who just would have liked to have had some personal contact. I mean, sometimes they'll go in the window, sometimes they'll do an iPad, but it's not the same as giving someone a hug and telling them face to face that you love them. So what we've now done, but we had to take those steps because we've seen when it runs rampant in nursing homes, it causes massive amounts of fatalities and hospitalizations. But what we also know is, look, we got to figure out how to get to yes on that. So I'm announcing a committee led by a lady named Mary Daniel from Northeast Florida, who her husband's in a memory care home. She wasn't able to visit once we had to put these protective measures in place. And so she decided after a little while, I'm just going to get a job there so I can go see him. So she's gone in, gets a job washing dishes, is able to go see him. So now she's going to help lead us to say, okay, let's figure out a way to do this, because the emotional toll of this is significant. And, we do different things about, hey, no one in a nursing home or this, all these measures to try to protect against COVID. Those have ramifications far beyond COVID. So we've recognized that. We're going to work to get to yes on it. Certainly, if someone has COVID antibodies, you should be able to go in and see. You're not going to pass you're not going to pass a live virus at that point. And then if you have PPE and some of these other things, look, the family members are going to be the most careful of anybody because it's their loved one. So we're working on that, and I think you're going to see some good news over the next couple weeks. But I think what's weighed on me is how lonely this is. I mean, it's a little bit different than losing someone from some other things, because they're in the hospital and a lot of times you can't go and hold their hand. Now, I do appreciate, I know Advent in Central Florida has allowed for the end-of-life situations to have the next of kin, and I would encourage all hospitals in Florida to do that. I think that to not have that opportunity as a family, I think is something that will stick with them for the rest of their lives.
I have to ask you, you've caught some criticism from your tone back in May, like when you were with the vice president and when you did your press conferences back then. You sort of You seem to be saying the experts blew it. Florida didn't get it as badly as we could have, and since then, obviously, the cases and the deaths have gone up. Had you had a different tone at that point, do you think Floridians would have taken this virus more seriously?
They took it seriously. Floridians have done a good job. But let me just go back. There were specific predictions about Florida being overwhelmed in the hospitals, massive death by mid-April. And that was being blared all across the country. People were getting really frightened. And then when it didn't happen, what a lot of some of these organizations were saying was, oh, Florida's just hiding everything. So they were accusing the Department of Health of hiding numbers. So I took umbrage of that. I think it was conspiracy theory. It was not based in fact. And I made my displeasure known. But Floridians have taken this seriously. I mean, and just think about what we were doing in May leading into June. Massive expansion of a testing apparatus. PPE. Every hospital had all the PPE they needed. We sent massive PPE to the nursing homes. We were facilitating therapeutics, whether it's remdesivir or convalescent plasma. And then we established over 20 COVID-only nursing facilities so that seniors could safely be isolated if they happened to be COVID positive. So we were building to prepare because we didn't know. It's an uncertain thing. There's a lot of people that thought, oh, it's going to come back with a vengeance in the fall. Well, it turns out, throughout the whole Sun Belt, we've seen the exact same viral curve happen over the summer. But we were prepared for it. We've been able to handle it. When hospitals asked us to help, we were there, whether it's testing, whether it's PPE, with helping the nursing homes. So we were prepared, and we were able to, to get through the highest point that we faced, which was probably mid-July.
I want to ask you about testing, because we have done a lot of tests. We've done 4 million. But even if we did 20 million tests, if these results don't come back for a week, or in some cases 2 weeks, what good is it doing for us? So my question is, when will every Floridian get to go take a test and get their results back within 48 hours, or at most 72?
Well, I think it depends on, how many people are symptomatic and not symptomatic. So what we've started to do at 2 of our test sites in Miami-Dade, which is our most prevalent county, we have point-of-care 15-minute tests there. We rolled it out this week. It's for symptomatic people and for senior citizens. All our other drive-through sites, we have symptomatic lanes for people who are 65 and up or symptomatic or both. They go in, self-swab, we get it to a lab. Once the lab receives it, they're getting it in 24 hours. So if they get it in 24, another 24, 48. If they get it in 48, 24, 72. So we're trying to focus it on the folks who really need the results the most. The asymptomatic cases, the problem with that is, CDC's now come out and talked about you can test positive for up to 12 weeks, but you're not infectious. Obviously, you're infectious for 5 to 7 days probably. It's dead virus that they're picking up. So the utility of doing the asymptomatic, it just hasn't worked the way we had hoped. And so I think by doing lab prioritization to the symptomatic, we can ensure a quicker time there. But part of the problem is we're doing 750, 800,000 tests nationwide. Florida will get, 80 to 100,000 test results pretty regularly. These labs are not necessarily cut out to handle that level of volume. So we think by prioritizing the folks that have symptoms, try to get them the results back quicker, that's the best way. But I don't think anyone can sit here and tell you, oh, yeah, everyone will get their results back in 24, 48, because the fact is, there's only a finite amount of lab capacity. I've authorized money for us to do high-throughput machines, but there's just none available right now because, everyone wants these things. And, we're going to get more point-of-care testing at nursing homes. Part of that may play into, the visitation and being able to do that, but there's not going to be a point-of-care test in every nursing home, and it's not like you can just get point-of-care tests. And so we're working with what we have to try to prioritize the symptomatic people.
I want to ask you about contact tracing. The state has spent millions of dollars on this. We recently spoke with a woman. She was making $23 an hour. They put her up in a hotel for 3 weeks, and she came to us and she says, you know how many people I have contact traced? 0. So I know that this has been an issue with some state lawmakers bringing it up as well. Can you tell me why is this happening and how can it be fixed?
Well, I'd have to know a little bit more about that situation, but here's what I would say on the contact tracing. When you have a largely asymptomatic illness, which this is, most of the people who are infected either are not symptomatic or symptoms are so mild they're not going to go in to seek medical attention. They're not even probably going to go get tested. So when that happens, you have to look at contact tracing is not going to be able to suppress the entire disease. It just won't happen. So what do you use contact tracing for? You use it to suppress discrete outbreaks. And so we've actually done that in the state of Florida. For example, we test every staff at nursing homes every 2 weeks. That's over 200,000 employees that get tested biweekly. Now, if some of them test positive, you then go in, you trace who they've been there, you test the residents as need be, and you limit the outbreak. And we've had success for that, with that. Same thing on some of the, we had a lot of agriculture outbreaks in June. They were able to go, they were able to trace, they were able to isolate. So I think it has a role, but I think in March, when people were talking about contact tracing, a lot of people were under the impression that the only cases we'd have were symptomatic cases. I remember we were testing, we have 3 cases in this county. It was like a big deal. Well, it turns out once they started doing antibody testing, CDC has said for every 1 case, there's probably 10, 11 times as many actual infections. Again, most of them, fortunately, are mild. Those are not people seeking medical attention. But we just have to understand that this thing has been widespread really since probably February and March. And so the contact tracing is going to be more targeted. It does have a role, but it's not going to be the end-all, be-all in dealing with the coronavirus.
Your recent eviction moratorium, the wording changed in the order that you signed, and we noticed that there wasn't an announcement or anything, and some local judges are worried that there could be a flood of folks receiving eviction notices. Now, it says you can't finalize the eviction, but are you concerned that a lot of people are going to be getting these eviction notices in the mail and they're not going to be expecting it?
Well, I don't think so, because if you look at it, anyone that's had any kind of hardship because of the coronavirus is the same as it's been throughout the whole time. But at the same time, if you're somebody that's just been working and hasn't lost a job or had any negative impacts from this, now obviously you just have to pay the bills. And so it just draws a distinction between folks that have been affected by this, lost their job, lost their income, been ill, had to care for a family member. Anything connected to that, would obviously still apply.
Do you think there are people out there who are just using this as a reason not to pay their bills?
I don't know if there are, but if they're not, then obviously it would have no impact either way.
We got to talk about school. You've made the decision, send kids back to school, brick and mortar, 5 days a week. Now, I was looking at the numbers, about 40,000 cases of kids testing positive. There have been 400 hospitalizations and 7 deaths. Now, that's certainly not nothing. So why, when you look at those numbers, do you decide it's appropriate to open schools back up?
Well, I'd say, what would the risk of not opening the schools be? I mean, are there not going to be any types of negative impacts if kids don't have access to in-person instruction? There's going to be a lot of negative impact. They've already been out since the middle of March. A lot of students have lost ground. That's just natural. Just think of if they're not able to have access. And look, it's a parent's choice. If a parent looks at those numbers, now I would point out, and I think the CDC has pointed out, that's much less in terms of hospitalizations and COVID-related fatalities than seasonal influenza is for people under 18, and we tend to send kids to school during that. But nevertheless, I think a parent can make that decision. But imagine you don't have access to in-person. Some of these parents, you have a single mom that they have to work. They can't watch the kids all the time. Just think if the dropout rate increases, say 2 or 3%, what are the ramifications of that going forward into the future? So I think the best way to do it is to say parents have a choice. If they're not comfortable sending their child in person, then by all means, they can opt for distance learning, and that should be an option for every Florida parent. At the same time, if parents look at it and say, I really think we do need to do in-person learning, we need to do what we can to give them that option. So it's really up to the parent. But I would also note when people talk about cases with any group, but certainly with people that are under 18, what percentage of those, quote, cases was the child actually ill? Very few, they were seriously ill, fortunately. And for whatever reason, people that are under the age of 18, tend to handle this virus much better than people who are older. And so that's just a fact that we should understand. There's never going to be zero risk in anything we do. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you there's not. But I think the risk of not giving that option far outweighs the risk of having the in-person instruction. And I would also note, Great Britain, one of their epidemiologists who works with the Prime Minister said, they've not been able to identify an instance of a child affecting a teacher in any of these schools anywhere in the world. Now, maybe it's happened, but certainly it hasn't been frequent, and I think that's another important thing. With influenza, we view the students, rightfully, because that's what, as big drivers of community transmission. It's kind of a petri dish, they infect adults. Well, I think with coronavirus, for whatever reason, they haven't been the engines of transmission. So it's less risky for them, and they're not big drivers of transmission. And so to me, the balance of that is surely we've got to give parents an option.
The science isn't really settled on the transmission. I agree with you. Science certainly is overwhelmingly that kids are not as affected by this virus as much. But I've read some articles that say kids transmit it, some articles that say kids aren't transmitting it.
Well, I think the thing is I think it's been a mistake to say kids cannot transmit it because, you can never say never. But I would say, is there evidence of kids being drivers of community spread? Because if they're less affected by it, and we think, that with reasonable precautions they'll be safe, then the next thing you're worried about is, are the schools going to be sparking outbreaks? And that just hasn't been the case, throughout other parts of the world when they've looked at it. At the same time, there's bound to be, a case somewhere. There's going to be different things. And I think just understanding that, if someone is symptomatic, obviously the student stays home, have the availability to test, and then treat it like we treat, other illnesses. They're going to be able to handle that. But I do think that, Sweden and Norway closed schools, Sweden kept them open throughout the epidemic. They put out a joint statement, basically with Norway saying, we should have kept the schools open. It didn't affect Sweden's community spread, and Sweden did have a lot of community spread, but it wasn't being driven by the schools. But at the same time, it's up to the parents. If the parents don't want that option and they want to opt for virtual, they can do it. My fear, though, with if you did all virtual, is that has a disproportionately negative impact on our lower income families, because you're going to have some of the more affluent people, they're going to do a pod or they're going to hire a private tutor or whatever, and that's their right. But most of our families in Florida would not be able to do that, and I do worry about the lack of academic progress and the lack of structure. We had an event talking about the importance of athletics. I had Charlie Ward, the former Heisman Trophy winner. We had some other great folks, and Charlie made the point, these kids are out doing stuff anyways, and so if you have them in, he's a basketball coach, I can have structure, I have the discipline, but the contact that they're having is really not much different whether they're in a school setting or whether they're out playing in the parks.
Hillsborough County, I think yesterday, they said that they're going to delay the brick and mortar schools for a month. They're going to do virtual during that time. If other districts start making that decision, are you comfortable with that, or are you going to push for them to open sooner?
I think it's a problem, and it's not even about what I think. We have underlying statutory law in Florida. The three southern Florida counties, they're in phase 1, so they're in a different posture in terms of our emergency. All the other counties outside of southeast Florida are in phase 2, and the fear with what Hillsborough is doing is when the statute then applies, it really does trigger changes in funding. So they had agreed to go back offering in person to folks. Then they flipped, and I'm not sure why, because if you look at the coronavirus numbers in Hillsborough, there's been a steady improvement over the last 10 to 14 days. Positivity's down, COVID positive hospitalizations are down, ED visits for COVID-like illness, all trending down and in a good direction. So I wasn't involved in that decision, obviously, but I don't think that's the right decision if you're in those phase 2 counties, particularly if you're trending downward.
Are you saying if counties do decide to make that decision, their funding might be at risk?
I think just the operation of the law, as I've looked at it, I've discussed it with the education commissioner, the law requires you to offer a certain amount of in-person instruction. And so, I'm concerned about it. So what the commissioner has done is he's going to now go to Hillsborough and say, okay, tell us on a school-by-school basis, which schools would be problematic. Is there no school in the county that would be able to offer it, and really have them lay out? And I think he'll probably look at funding decisions based off that. But I think to just, to say nothing, or you can't have anything open. For example, we were in just across the bay in Clearwater at a school for special needs kids. And we had those teachers there saying, we need to get back in the classroom. The kids need us. The virtual is not working when it comes to our kids, and they want to be back in the classroom. And here's the thing, that we had some parents there who were itching to get their kids back. There were a couple that said, I'm going to probably wait and do virtual. That's how it should be. The parent really does need to have the option.
We just recently spoke with a bunch of different school districts in our area in Central Florida. They were telling us, basically, we're being forced to reopen 5 days a week, and we really don't have the resources and PPE to keep these teachers safe. What is the state doing to keep those teachers safe?
Well, first of all these counties have either gotten hundreds of millions of dollars directly from the federal government, or the state has sent the CARES Act portion of the money. So all the local folks have the ability, to do this. We obviously could be helpful if you want to, but the way I look at it is we've been able to do all these other aspects of life has been going on. Obviously, there's been PPE, proper precautions, so I have no doubt that it can be done. I mean, if they need some more materials or something, that's something that we can look at. But everyone has money for this. The state and the locals now have money because of the CARES Act. We probably are going to get some more coming down the pike in this phase 4, but I think it can be done, and I think it has been done in everything from hospital setting to some of the things that we do on a retail or supermarkets. Everyone's been able to figure out whether that's face covering, whether that's some of the things you have gloves, some of the things you have like in the nursing homes, we gave everyone the gowns, the gloves, and face shields in addition to N95 masks. And so I think that there's a way to get it done.
Last question on schools. I want you to take your governor hat off. I'll take my news anchor hat off. You're a dad of 3, beautiful kids. I'm a dad of 3. I have a daughter in middle school and high school. They're scared. They're scared to go back. They're scared to catch this. They're scared to maybe give it to their grandparents or their teachers. If you're the dad and you've got, say, a 14-year-old or a 12-year-old, what do you say to that child?
Oh, I would say, fortunately, there's always going to be risks in life, and fortunately for us, this is a very low risk for people of your generation. And so you have an opportunity to get an education, you have an opportunity to be back with your friends, and accept that and face it head on. I would send my kids back if they were school age for sure, because I've just looked at the data and I'm very comfortable with the low risk that's there. Now, if one of my kids, God forbid, develops a significant underlying medical condition, if somebody has serious lung damage or they're being treated for some type of childhood cancer, well, that's a much different situation. And I've talked to parents who say, I really want them back in, but because of this, I'm going to hold them out, but my other kids are going to go back because they don't have it. So I think that obviously would depend on that. But I would say just generally, not just to kids, but to everybody, the way to handle this is not to be fearful, not to let the anxiety and stress overtake you. It's something that we have to deal with. We know a lot more about it today than we did at the beginning of March. There's obviously protective measures that have been put in place. People understand doing the basics like we have for One Goal, One Florida, where you are looking out at the most vulnerable, protecting those folks, not only in your family but others. You're doing things like proper sanitation. You're doing the physical distancing by avoiding closed spaces and crowded places. You're wearing a facial covering when you can't physically distance. Those things can make a difference, and I would just urge everybody to do it. But don't let the fear of this not let you live your life. That's not the way you do epidemics. I was just out talking to the road builders, and I quoted one of he's since passed away, one of the great epidemiologists in modern American history, D.A. Henderson, leading in terms of ending smallpox. And he said that an overriding principle was you wanted society, that you handle epidemics best when society functions as normal as possible, and when you allow society to go without allowing the fear and the anxiety to overtake it. So I just think that that's a lesson for us. And one of the things I'm concerned about with fear, not necessarily with kids, but if you look, starting in mid-March, huge drop in people going to emergency departments for heart and stroke symptoms. Now, those things don't just disappear, but there was a lot of fear about going to seek medical. People were worried about the virus. They thought the hospitals were overflowing, which wasn't true, but that was what they... So we're still not at the level that we would normally be. Those conditions get worse. And so that's an example of the fear, really leading to bad health outcomes. And of course, we know that there have been huge mental health fallouts from this already. And those are going to be things that we're going to see for months and months, if not years, into the future.
I want to touch on the economy, too. We're in the beautiful Hilton Bonnet Creek Resort here. This place sat empty for 5 months. Tourism, we know, is the lifeblood of Central Florida and Florida in general for our economy. How do we recover after global headlines of Florida is the epicenter of the pandemic?
Well, I think part of it's going to be actually looking at the performance, how Florida comes out on the other side of this. I mean, most of those headlines are designed to get clicks, and obviously that's just what we've seen time and time again. But I think if you look at how Florida's handled it, fortunately, some of the states that they now said did a good job, they have 3 to 4 times the fatality rate, that we have in Florida. So we focused on protecting the vulnerable. We understand it's something we're going to have to deal with. Part of the reason we've had a lot of cases is because we've tested a lot of people. But I do feel that the indicators are good. And here's the thing, too. We've kept Florida open during this. We did not shut everyone in their house. We understood you had to keep society functioning. Our unemployment rate, although much higher than we'd like, is lower than what most people were predicting just a couple months ago. Our tax revenues, while down from what we would hope, have not been down by as much as has been predicted. Home building. People are buying homes in the state of Florida, and that's been going on for months and months. And so, I think that people will see, as we get on the other side of this, they kept things going, they handled it. It's not easy ever dealing with it, but they handled it, and it is a good place to live, work, and visit.
You touched on unemployment. Certainly been a huge issue, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. Many blame that website you call a clunker that Rick Scott's administration paid millions for. Rick Scott recently said in an interview, some people are leaders, some people take responsibility, some people solve problems, and some people blame others. I think that dart was headed in your direction. How would you like to respond to that?
Well, that's the thing. It's my responsibility to fix it. Wasn't a system that was a good use of taxpayer dollars. We have an IG investigation into that for $77 million. When we were fixing it, I had engineers tell me that they couldn't believe that the state would have paid that much money for it. So I think it's in the taxpayers' interest to get answers on that. But we had a situation where this thing was totally overwhelmed, and really there was no easy way to fix it. We managed we surged personnel. I brought in folks to fix the internal configuration, and now we've paid over $13 billion, over 1.8 million individual claimants. So it wasn't easy. End of March, April, was rough, and you're looking at the numbers. It's like, man, you paid 3,000 claims. I've got 1 million people waiting. Now 10, and then we started to get up and then started to get it. So now you're at the point, folks submit, and obviously all the information's there. It can be processed, in relatively quick order. I also had to make the decision to waive a lot of the requirements that we would normally insist upon that would make it take longer. So under normal circumstances, really with all those requirements in there, probably takes you 4 or 5 weeks to get it on normal times. We obviously knew that it was an emergency situation, so we let people apply immediately. We waived some of the work search requirements, tried to streamline it as best as we can. And so I think it was a very difficult situation. It was not something that, I'm glad the state paid that much money for, but it was absolutely my responsibility to deal with it. We put in huge effort for it. The number one thing we did other than health in terms of manpower and effort was the unemployment.
And now, we've all can agree that that website was a disaster. But the thing that I find strange is the company that made that website, Deloitte, and was paid all this money for what you call a clunker, your administration's now about to give them $135 million for another website. Can you explain to me why we're still doing business with this company?
Well, one, that's the bid's under protest. But two, and I think you'd appreciate, the governor is not allowed to mess with the procurement. Because, if I got involved and said, don't give to them, so that would be violating Florida law. So I've not been involved with that in any way, shape, or form. I think this bid protest will go forward.
Would you like to be involved with it, if you could?
Well, if I could, obviously I don't want to see that. I mean, I think that this investigation needs to be completed, the IG investigation, before we would do any type of things. And so if there's anything on my desk about it, I would obviously say no. At the same time, because I asked my legal folks, what can I do? Because I didn't know that they had gotten the bid. I mean, and that's how it should be. You want that happening apart from politics, because if you start getting the political stuff involved in there, it creates a whole host of issues. But in this case, I was like, is there a way we can do it? And they're like, there's a bid protest. This is how the process goes. That if I were to interfere, that would not be consistent with law. But of course, I don't like seeing that. I mean, this was a lot of money that the state paid. The results were not good, and I think the taxpayers need an explanation. So we're working on getting that in terms of the back end about what happened. And I would like to think, actually, though, DEO did submit I guess during this process, I've now found out a negative recommendation regarding Deloitte as part of how the bids work. But it was the type of thing where I guess they dropped their bids so low in terms of the money that basically just following the law, I think that was why they were selected.
Oh, okay. One more question? One last question here. I want to ask you about maybe the most common criticism you get. People say that your political identity is so tied into the president, Donald Trump, that you are unwilling to go against any decision he makes. Is that true?
Yeah, I think it's just a narrative. I don't think it's true at all. And understand what we're doing here with the pandemic, a lot of that is me asking the White House to help us with things. So they've come through with a lot of different things. So it has nothing to do with me making policy or them. It's, hey, we need remdesivir. Can we get some down? I need some more testing. Can we help? Now, we did a lot of that our own as well, but we've had a great relationship. They've helped the state of Florida a lot. And then if you also look at some of the things we've been able to do, we got massive relief for Hurricane Michael victims early in my administration, which no one was really paying attention to that, but it was a major problem. We've gotten huge support for our Everglades restoration efforts. We got $200 million because the president agreed to put it into the budget. We're also getting support on the EAA reservoir that we're getting down there. So I think it's been a good, productive relationship. I think whenever we need stuff in Florida, I've been able to pick up the phone, and get it done there. But I think a lot of it is just, there's a lot of people who view politics just through the prism of pro or anti-Trump. And so everything they say is about that. So if they don't like Trump, then anyone that ever does anything, they view that as like kind of a heresy or whatever. But I made the point when I was running for governor, as governor, I got to do what's best for the state, and I got to work with the president to deliver results for Florida. And I think across the board, you can see that we've had a very productive time over the last year and a half. We're going to keep working together to be able to advance the interest of Florida. So I think I think in the pandemic too, we've gotten a lot done, and not just with the president. To be fair, the vice president, the cabinet secretaries, they've all been very available when Florida's needed assistance. They've really worked hard to help us out.
All right, Governor Ron DeSantis, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks. Yep.